More than 100 years later, the Titanic still captures people's imagination like few other events in history. It's one of the most talked about maritime disasters ever. And yet, it's full of strange details, unanswered questions, and stuff that just doesn't add up. It's almost like the ship was doomed before it even set sail. So today, we're diving into the Titanic mysteries that still can't be explained. Smash that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and let's get into it. Among the Titanic's first-class passengers was William T. Stead, a big name in 19th century journalism and one of the pioneers of investigative reporting. But what's seriously creepy is that he basically predicted the disaster years before it happened. Back in 1886, Stead wrote a short story about a ship that sinks due to a lack of lifeboats. Sound familiar? And in 1892, he published another story where a vessel hits an iceberg and needs rescue. Way too specific to be a coincidence, right? On the night of the disaster, witnesses say he helped women and children get into lifeboats, then was seen alone on the deck, staring up at the sky, moments before the ship went down. His body was never found. Some people believe his writings were more than just fiction, like he had some kind of sixth sense about his own fate. Creepy doesn't even begin to cover it. Some people have that weird gut instinct when something bad's about to happen, and Margaret Molly Brown, she definitely felt it. Before even boarding the Titanic, she told her family she had a terrible feeling, like the trip wasn't meant to happen. She didn't want to go, but had to return to the US urgently because her son was ill, so reluctantly she got on board. While on the ship, she confided in other passengers that the atmosphere just felt off. The vibe was heavy, the mood tense, like something bad was hanging in the air. And then, boom, the iceberg hit, and her unease suddenly made sense. Despite the panic, Molly stayed calm. She helped children and elderly people get into lifeboats and only got in one herself after being ordered by an officer. After the rescue, she continued helping others, handing out food, clothes, and comforting survivors. That's why people remember her as the unsinkable Molly Brown, not just because she survived, but because she was a total legend during the worst night imaginable. Alright, here's one of the wildest Titanic theories ever, that it sank because of a cursed Egyptian mummy. Yup, according to an old legend, a priestess known as Amen-Ra was removed from her tomb and taken to England. After that, everyone who got close to her suffered misfortunes, strange deaths, or just straight up bad luck. The British Museum that had her allegedly got so spooked they decided to ship her off to America. And guess which vessel they supposedly used? You guessed it, the Titanic. Of course, there's no official record of the mummy being on board, but the story stuck. People claim she now rests in a watery tomb deep in the Atlantic, and that's probably for the best, so she can't bring bad luck to anyone else ever again. Real or not, this theory adds a seriously spooky twist to an already chilling story. When people start having visions before a major tragedy, it's hard not to get chills. And this next one, it's freaky. A young Scottish girl named Jessie Sayre was on her deathbed around the time the Titanic sank. Hours before the news broke, she started hallucinating and described a massive ship sinking into the ocean, with a man named Wally playing the violin during the chaos. No one had a clue what she was talking about, until days later when news of the Titanic hit. Even more bizarre, one of the real musicians who kept playing until the very end was Wallace Hartley, the ship's band leader, and his friends called him Wally. Too accurate to be a coincidence? Some say it was just a strange case of deja vu. Others believe it was a divine warning that nobody understood in time. Out of the more than 700 people who survived the Titanic, 6 were Chinese men, but here's the weird part, they basically vanished after being rescued. There were 8 Chinese passengers in total, and 6 made it out alive. One of them was even found clinging to a floating door. Yep, that floating door scene from the movie might have been inspired by him, but after being pulled from the icy water and brought to the US, they were immediately rejected under the Chinese Exclusion Act, which banned most Asian immigrants. They were shoved onto another boat headed for Cuba, and then poof, no records, no trail, nothing. Some believe they scattered across the UK, Canada, or India. Others think the US quietly erased them from the story altogether. Even their families didn't know what happened. It's like they survived one of the worst disasters in history, only to be completely erased from it. We all know the Titanic hit an iceberg, but what if I told you the ship was already on fire before it even left the dock? Turns out there was a fire smoldering deep inside the coal bunker, specifically in bunker hash 6, days before the ship set sail. The crew couldn't fully put it out, so they kept shoveling the burning coal straight into the furnaces to hide the issue. Now here's the twist. Some experts think the fire weakened the steel hull right where the iceberg later struck. So maybe the impact wouldn't have been so deadly if that part of the ship hadn't already been compromised. Back then, investigators focused only on the iceberg, but today, a lot of people believe that fire played a huge role in the tragedy that followed. This one still pisses people off. Why did a ship carrying over 2,200 people only have enough lifeboats for about half of them? Well, believe it or not, the Titanic was actually within regulations. The outdated laws only required 16 lifeboats for ships over 10,000 tons, and the Titanic was 4 times that size. Also, and this is outrageous, the shipbuilders didn't want to ruin the aesthetic of the deck with too many lifeboats. They wanted the ship to look sleek, modern, and fancy. Safety? They were so confident in the ship being unsinkable, thanks to its watertight compartments, that they thought the lifeboats were just for show. That overconfidence, mixed with vanity and bad planning, ended up costing over 1,500 lives. A disaster wrapped in arrogance, plain and simple. Believe it or not, a missing key might have doomed the Titanic. The binoculars for the lookout crew were kept in a locked cabinet, but the key, that accidentally got taken by David Blair, an officer who was reassigned at the last minute and left the ship with the key still in his coat pocket. So when lookout Frederick Fleet took his post that night, he had to rely on his own eyes. No binoculars, no chance of seeing an iceberg in the dark ocean until it was way too late. Fleet later testified that if they'd had binoculars, they might have seen the iceberg earlier and steered away, but by the time he spotted it, there was nothing they could do. And that forgotten key, it eventually went up for auction for over $150,000. Talk about a tiny object with a massive impact. Here comes the big conspiracy theory. What if the ship that sank wasn't actually the Titanic? Some people believe that the ship that went down was actually the Olympic, Titanic's near-identical sister ship, which had suffered serious damage months earlier in a naval collision. The theory claims that the White Star Line swapped the two ships, sent out the Olympic under the Titanic's name, and planned a staged accident to collect insurance money, but something went wrong, and the planned rescue didn't happen. Even crazier, financier JP Morgan, who owned the shipping company, canceled his ticket last minute, maybe because he knew what was coming. Skeptics point out structural differences between the ships, but believers say everything was modified to fool inspectors. Real? Fake? One thing's for sure, it's one of the juiciest theories surrounding the Titanic. Not all Titanic stories are sad. This one might just warm your heart. Rigel, a massive Newfoundland dog belonging to First Officer William Murdoch, reportedly jumped into the freezing water after the ship sank. These dogs were built for cold weather, and Rigel swam for hours beside the lifeboats, refusing to leave the survivors. But here's the wild part. The rescue ship Carpathia nearly missed one of the lifeboats hidden in the fog, until Rigel started barking non-stop. The crew heard him and turned in time to save everyone on board. Some historians doubt Rigel ever existed, but the story's been told for generations. Whether he was real or just a legend, Rigel became a symbol of loyalty and bravery, a four-legged hero in one of the darkest nights of the 20th century.